So now we're going to get into the different versions of the Bible. We'll get into, according to Wiki, I counted 104. Now, I might be off, but 104 complete Bibles. That's not counting like just ones with notes in it or anything else like that or whatever. 104. So it's either I miscounted and it's from 102 to 107 or something. Let's get into this. The Bible was written across a period of several centuries in the languages of Hebrew and Aramaic, Old Testament, and Greek, New Testament. With the changing of nations and cultures across the centuries, the original writings have been translated many times to make the Bible available in different languages. Following are the major versions of the translations of the Bible that have issued during the past 2,200 years. Just as God inspired people to write His Word, He also preserved the Bible by using human instruments to pass it on to succeeding generations. Ancient versions. Ancient versions of the Bible, such as those that were produced in classical language, such as Greek, Syriac, and Latin. The following ancient versions were issued from the date during a 600-year period from about 200 BC to AD 400. Greek. The oldest Bible translation in the world was made in Alexandria, Egypt, where the Old Testament was transferred from Hebrew into Greek for the benefit of the Greek-speaking Jews in that city. A Jewish community had existed in Alexandria almost from its foundation by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. In 2 or 3 generations, this community had forgotten its native Palestinian language. These Jews realized they needed the Hebrew scriptures rendered into the only language they knew, Greek. The first section of the Hebrew Bible to be translated into Greek was the Pentateuch. Sorry if I'm off on that. Of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, some before 200 BC, other parts were translated during this next century. This version is commonly called the Septuagint, from Septuaginta, the Latin word for 70 LXX. The name was selected because of the tradition of the Pentateuch was translated into Greek about 70 elders of Israel who were brought to Alexandria especially for this purpose. Only a few fragments of this version survive from the old period before Christ. Most copies of the Greek Old Testament belong to the Christian era and were made by Christians. The John Reynolds University Library, Manchester, England, owns a fragment of Deuteronomy in Greek from the 2nd century BC. Another fragment of the same book in Greek dating from about the same exists in Cairo. Other fragments of the Septuagint have been identified along the text known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947. When Christianity penetrated the world of Greek-speaking Jews and then Gentiles, the Septuagint was the Bible for preaching the gospel. Most of the Old Testament quotations in the New Testament are taken from the Greek Bible. In fact, the Christians adopted the Septuagint so wholeheartedly that the Jewish people lost interest in it. They produced other Greek versions that did not lend themselves so easily to Christian interpretation. I'm sorry I was saying that wrong. It's Septuagint, not Septuagint. The Septuagint thus became the authorized version of the early Gentile churches. This day is the official version of the Old Testament used in the Greek Orthodox Church. After the books of the New Testament were written and accepted by the early church, they were added to the Old Testament Septuagint to form the complete Greek version of the Bible. The Septuagint was based on a Hebrew text much older than the surviving Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament. Occasionally, this Greek Old Testament helped scholars reconstruct the wording and passage which had been lost or miscopied by scribes as the text was passed down across the centuries. An early instance of this occasion occurs in Genesis 4:8 when Cain's words to Abel, "Let us go out into the field," are reproduced from the Septuagint in the RSV and other modern versions. These words have been lost to standard Hebrew text, but they were necessary to complete the sense of the English translation. Aramaic Targums. The word Targum means translation. After their return from captivity in ancient Babylon, many Jews spoke Aramaic, a sister language instead of the pure Hebrew and ancestors. I didn't know that. They found it difficult to follow the reading of the Hebrew scriptures at worship, so they adopted the practice providing an oral paraphrase into Aramaic when the scriptures were read in Hebrew. The person who provided the paraphrase, the turjuman, was an official in the synagogue. So actually, Aramaic and the Jews, and the reason why Jesus might have spoken it and other things of that nature, came from the captivity in Babylon. One of the earliest examples of such a paraphrase occurs in Nehemiah 8:8. Because of the work of Ezra, the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament, was officially recognized as the constitution of the Jewish state during the days of the Persian Empire. This constitution was read publicly to the whole community and the return to Jerusalem. The approved readers read distinctly or with interpretation from the book in the law of God, and they gave the sense and helped them with the understanding of the reading. This practice continued as standard in Jewish synagogue in the Jewish synagogue for a long time. The Targum, paraphrase of the Hebrew, was not read from a written document. I'm sorry if I'm messing that word up. Was not read from a written document, lest some of the congregation might think an authoritative law was being read. Some religious leaders apparently held that Targum should not be written down even for the outside synagogue. Yeah, I'm splitting this up into 2 parts. This is going to be a while. In time, all objections to a written Targum, the Targum, disappeared. A number of such paraphrases began to be used. Official Jewish recognition was given to 2 in particular, the Targum of Onkelos and the Pentateuch, I think I got it right that time, and the Targum of Jonathan on the prophets. Some were far from being word-for-word translations. As expanded paraphrases, they included interpretations and comments on the Bible text. Some New Testament writers indicate knowledge of Targumic interpretations in their quotations from the Old Testament. For example, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay," Romans 12:9, Hebrews 10:30, is a quotation from Deuteronomy 32:35, but it conforms neither to Hebrew text nor in Greek text of the Septuagint. This particular phrase comes from the Targum. So again, the words of Ephesians 4:8, "When he ascended on high, he led captivity captive, but gave gifts to men," are taken from Psalm 68:18. But the Hebrew and the Septuagint text speaks on receiving of gifts. Only the Targum on this text mentions the giving of gifts. Syriac. The term Syriac describes the Eastern Aramaic language spoken in northern Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, northeast of the land of Palestine. Large Jewish settlements were located there. At some point in the Old Testament, it must have been translated into Syriac for their benefit. As Christianity expanded, this area became an important center of Christian life and action. The Christians in northern tribes of Mesopotamia inherited the Syriac Old Testament and added Syriac translation of the New Testament to it. This authorized version of the Syriac Bible is called the Peshitta, the common or simple version. In the present form, it goes back to the beginning of the 5th century AD, but there were earlier Syriac translations of the parts of the New Testament. 2 important manuscripts of the Gospel exist in an old Syriac version, which probably goes back to around the 2nd century AD. The Syriac-speaking church was very missionary-minded. It carried the gospel into Central Asia, evangelizing India and parts of China. It translated portions of the Bibles from Syriac into the local languages of the areas which it evangelized. The earliest forms of the Bible in the languages of Armenia and Georgia, both north of Armenia, were based on the Syriac version. Gothic. Now we're going into Gothic. Across the Rhine and Danube frontiers of the Roman Empire lived a race of people known as the Goths. The evangelization of the Ostrogoths, those who lived in the north of the Danube River, began in the 3rd century, about AD 360. Bishop Ulfilas, the apostle of Goths, led his converts south of the Dunami, Suseto, who was now Bulgaria. There he translated the Bible into language. The Gothic version, which was the first translation of the Bible into a language of the Germanic family. English, German, Dutch, and Scandinavian belonged to this language group. Latin. Now in Latin. The need for a Latin Bible first arose during the 2nd century AD, when Latin began to replace Greek as the dominant language of Roman Empire. The first Old Testament section of the Latin Bible were considered unreliable, since they were actually translated of a translation of a translation. They were based on the Septuagint, which in turn was a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Since the New Testament was originally in Greek, it was translated directly into the Latin language. Several competing New Testament translations were in use through the Latin-speaking world as early as about 250 AD. The task of producing one standard Latin Bible to replace the competing translations was entrusted by Damascius, Bishop of Rome, 366 to 384, to his secretary Jerome. Jerome undertook the task of unwilling, knowing to that replace an old version of the new is bound to cause offense, even if now new is better. He began with the revision of the Gospels, followed by the Psalms. After completing the New Testament, Jerome mastered the Hebrew language in order to translate Old Testaments into Latin. He completed his work in AD 405. Jerome's translation of the Bible is known as the Latin Vulgate, in which it did not win instant acceptance. Many were suspicious of it, and it varied so much from the versions that they were familiar, but this time superior merits caused it to gain popularity. The best-serving manuscript of the Latin Vulgate, the Codex Amientinus, is now in the Laurentian Library in Florence, Italy, written in monastery in Northumbria, England. It was presented to Pope Gregory II in 716. The Latin Vulgate is especially important because it was the medium through which the gospel arrived in Western Europe and remained there in standard version to this part of the world in centuries. In 1546, the Council of Trent decided that only this same ancient Vulgate edition be held its authentic public lecture, disputations, sermons, and expository discourses, and that no one make bold or presume to reject it on any pretext. Until the 20th century, no translation of the Bible except those based on the Vulgate were recognized as authoritative by the Roman Catholic Church. That's interesting. The Old English versions. So now we're getting to that. Until the beginning of the 16th century, all Bible versions of the languages of masses of Western Europe were based on the Latin Vulgate. Among those, the Old English versions are special interest. Most of these versions consisted of only the parts of the Bible, and even these had limited circulation. In this period, few of the people of ancient England could read. Many of the familiar stories of the Bible were turned into verse and set to music so they could be sung and memorized. Caedmon, an unlettered poet of Whitby, is said to have turned the whole history of salvation into a song in the 7th century. Bede, the monk of Gerard, the most learned man of his day in Western Europe, devoted the last 10 days of his life to turning the Gospels into English so they could be read by the common man. Alfred the Great, king of a large part of southern and western England, defeated the Danish invaders in 1878. He published a code of laws that was introduced by the Old Testament in translations of the Ten Commandments and other brief passages from the Bible. Some of the earliest Old English versions of scriptures were written between the lines of Latin language manuscripts. The manuscripts known as the Lindisfarne Gospels, now in the British Museum of London, was produced originally in Latin shortly before 700. 2.5 centuries later, a priest named Aldred wrote between the lines of the text in literal translation of the Northumbrian dialect of Old English. Bible texts of this type, with some letters decorated in gold and silver, are known as illustrated manuscripts. So when the book has the drawings of gold and silver, it's an illustrated manuscript. We're going to get into part 2, and we're just going to check out how many versions there are, man, and just keep going through it.